And I'm now delighted to welcome two outsiders. It's impossible to describe her because she's got so many things. She's a model, she's an actress, she's a journalist, she's spoken at the US Congress about Chinese human rights abuses. She herself is a dissident. She was a candidate for Miss World Canada, and then she was blocked by the Chinese. There, you've got the whole package right here. Anastasia Lin, welcome to Australia and to Outsiders.
Thank you.
Now, seriously, your CV, I mean, you know, people would kill for that CV. So let's kick off. Tell us your story. It is fascinating.
I was born in China, and I spent the first 13 years there. So that's why I felt like my communist education might be of help for the outsiders to understand China's mentality. Well, when I was little, I was a communist leader.
Wow.
Well, I guess as big as a Chinese communist youth leader can get in a class. So I did a lot of the indoctrination work for the government. So I organized my classmates to sit together and, show their ideas, talk about their opinions. Of course, there's only one opinion you can really talk about, which is the pro-government one. And I also attacked government's enemy, like Falun Gong, Tibetans, and Uyghurs, and democratic movement activists. So after I came to Canada, it was like, oh, wow, I believed in a lie. But of course, my mom sort of did the job of introducing different kind of news, Hong Kong newspaper that talks about Tiananmen massacre to our home, so that I would actually read them and open my mind to it. It was a scary experience to sort of learn that your entire life of knowledge is sort of based on a lie.
So why did your parents go to Canada?
My mom, she was a university professor in China, and she taught Western economics. And she knows that she doesn't want my education to be just political slogans. And so that's why we moved.
All right. So then, tell us about, you got into modeling, you got into acting as a child actor, and then tell us about what happened with your confrontations with China.
Well, I ran for Miss World Canada not on the most honorable reason that people think that I usually do, like, oh, I want to run for, like, human rights and stuff. I actually did it because it was kind of cool. You get to wear the beautiful dresses and command attention on the stage. But then after I won Miss World Canada on a human rights platform, which I thought it was just very general, though I want to speak up for people who are persecuted in China, but it was very, like, world peace type of human rights. And so the Chinese government took it way more seriously than I did. And they went to my father and threatened him.
Wow.
And said that if your daughter doesn't stop talking about human rights, we are going to persecute your family like in the Cultural Revolution. That's when...
Family back in China or family in Canada?
All my family are in China, my father included, except for my mother.
Right.
So that was a huge surprise. So I wrote for the Washington Post about my story. And then that year, the final of Miss World was held in China, in Sanya. And everybody was like, how are you going to get in? I'm like, I'm not quite sure, but let me try. So they didn't give me a visa invitation. All the other Miss Worlds did. And so I thought I would just try my luck. And I flew to Hong Kong, tried to get into Sanya with tourist visa. But they blocked me and declared me persona non grata.
Wow.
And they've been threatening my family ever since, my grandparents, my uncles. It's unpleasant.
How is life for them in China on a daily basis? Do they get any kind of heavy persecution or intimidation?
Well, besides that, my father's company is pretty much destroyed right now. He had about several hundred employees, and it was a very successful business. After my story broke out, the bank started suing him, the partners started suing him, and he just, I don't know how he's doing right now because we can't really communicate through...
Now, you spoke about Chinese human rights abuses to the US Congress. Tell us about that.
Yes. And even to the parliament here.
Oh, good. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. US Congress, they invited me to talk about the treatment of overseas Chinese by the Communist Party. Because people somehow think that, oh, you're in the land of Australia or US, so that you must be free. But it really isn't like that. We don't have freedom of speech outside of China. As long as your business or your family is back in China, they use it as leverage. They use it as leverage whenever you want to speak up. But that's the same thing for states, too. Like when Australia or Canada wants to basically exercise their sovereignty or, speak up about democracy, they arrest Canadian citizen and Australian citizen or UK citizen inside China.
So we've seen now the last 11, 12 weeks, we've seen these incredible protests in Hong Kong. I think that this has started to show people the face of what the Chinese Communist government is all about. One of the things that we've seen, though, in Australia now lately is that Chinese nationalist demonstrators have been taking to the streets to demonstrate against pro-Hong Kong demonstrators. Are these being directed, do you think, by the Chinese officials from the mainland or from the consulates and embassies here, or are these spontaneous eruptions of protest?
They are not spontaneous, and I can tell everyone on record that they do not represent the idea of the overseas Chinese who wants to live here and have their family and have their business prosperous in Canada or Australia. There are a lot of Chinese United Front arms that are in student associations, professional associations.
That's the Overseas Propaganda Division? Is that what that is?
Yeah, United Front is the Overseas Propaganda Division. After Tiananmen Massacre, they established this office so that the overseas Chinese would all kowtow to the communist policy. And it's really unfortunate because the real Chinese immigrants outside, they feel like they're constantly being watched. In communities, they're not free to speak. Just like my example is a really good example. I spoke on a beauty pageant stage and my father was threatened. So they do not represent the idea of the real Chinese people who vote.
So the Chinese, so what you're saying is Chinese communities in Australia will be split between those who support the Chinese government and those who want to be free, who came here for our freedoms, for our way of life, for democracy, and they're still being intimidated. They can never escape the shadow of China. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, that's why they come here, because the rule of law and because the freedom and because the clean air and the clean food. So I'm not saying that there aren't new Chinese immigrants who are not familiar with the democratic process and who needs to familiarize themselves with the West. But the people who are going on the street, a lot of times in Canada, there are examples that they're paid like $50 or however much money and to go on the street and to do these demonstrations.
Tell us a little bit more about this indoctrination. You said you were a youth leader for the Communist Party, and from kindergarten you were singing songs about the Communist Party is closer to me than my mother. Tell us about that. It just seems incredible that your children that young are being told what to think.
Yeah, this is something that started from Stalin, because Stalin had a famous quote. It's like the production of soul is more important than the production of tanks. So they use writers, they use art and education as a tool to re-engineer the human soul. Basically just cut out anything that's not communist ideology. And you might think that, okay, that's in old China. It's not really present in today's China. But no, it is. It is, even though it's almost like a capitalist now, but the ideology is the same. They still want you to not have any other idea but that China is the best. And it's in disguise of nationalism, patriotism. Communist Party is not China. Communist culture is not Chinese culture. We had 5,000 years of glorious culture, and it's an inward-oriented empire before communists came along. And in the 19th century, if anything, it's the outside world that invaded China, not the other way around. And nowadays, Chinese Communist Party look at the outside world, look at Western democracies as enemies, because that's the only way they can legitimize their rule in China to the Chinese people. If we don't have an enemy, then why can't they deliver utopia that they promised? This is going a little far.
No, that's great. But also, tell us about Falun Gong, because you are a Falun Gong practitioner, is that correct?
I don't like to be labeled as anything. I just feel like...
Okay, no, that's fine, but just explain what... Because to most, we see the Falun Gong demonstrators sitting outside the Chinese embassies from time to time. We know a little bit about it, but I don't think we really understand it here. So we're not being told it's a religion. Is it a way of life? Is it Buddhism? What is it?
And why is it such a threat to the Chinese regime?
Yeah.
Well, Falun Gong itself, have you heard of Qigong? It's a yoga practice.
Right.
Yeah.
So after the Cultural Revolution, there is a spiritual vacuum. Chinese people cannot believe in Buddhism or Taoism. Therefore, they grab onto these. There are hundreds of schools of Qigong, which means life energy practice, that came out. Falun Gong is one of them. But Falun Gong did not give up the spiritual belief side to the ancient traditional Chinese and Taoist, Chinese Buddhist and Taoist belief. That's why the people that practice Falun Gong, the 100 million Chinese people that Communist Communist Party counted at the end of 1999, they sort of grabbed onto the Chinese traditional spiritual tradition, that part. And that's why it becomes so popular. And the reason why I feel like sometimes the Falun Gong, people don't really understand what it is because these people who are outside protesting, trying to show the world about their persecution, was also educated inside a communist state. So their way of education, their way of communication is not really understood by the West sometimes, but it does not mean that their intention is not good. It doesn't mean that they're not trying to oppose the communist regime.
They're outsiders, I think you said it. They're outsiders, Falun Gong. There you go, I like it. Also, now we've heard these reports, you spoke about it earlier, Anastasia, about Muslim women in parts of China being sterilized, whether the story is true or not, but that's the report. Would that surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me at all. If you tell me, well, Chinese Christians, Uyghurs, Tibetans, Falun Gong, these people are all being persecuted because they have independent thoughts. Because as soon as they have a belief, religion, or anything that guide them to believe in their own conscience and make decision for themselves, then every decision they're going to make is going to be in contradiction to the communist ideology. That's why all of them are being persecuted. And that's why Falun Gong and now Uyghur and Christians are an existential threat to the Chinese Communist Party, because it destables the foundation of their rule.
It's basically the individual versus the state. So all these minorities believe in individualism, and the state wants to crush, the Chinese state wants to crush individuals.
That's right, and that's why the Chinese jail, they torture those Falun Gong practitioners to make them denounce their belief. That's the only thing they have to do to get out of jail.
And
it's
the
just
re-education camps, would it be similar? How would they be?
Yeah, it's similar. It's a psychological reprogramming to make them give up their own conscience.
Well, just very quickly, what do you think, though, I'll bring it back to Australia. We have a big situation here with our universities with these things called Confucius Institutes, and they also exist in the United States. Are these part of basically a Chinese communist Beijing-led propaganda effort to push the Chinese communist line in our universities? And do you think that we should be allowing this sort of thing to be spread in our universities?
Yeah, if you want to see a Caucasian man singing songs praising the Communist Party and praising that the great leader Mao will lead us to glory, go to Confucius Institute.
Wow.
They are a cultural language program posed. Well, they're posed as a cultural language program, but inside they're a direct arm of the Chinese propaganda department, and they're praised for it. They won a soft power award in China for that. And Chinese government give these universities a certain amount of money and provide them with the curriculum. Well, there's no free lunch in the world. And from a communist regime, I'm just sometimes in awe at how naive people can be. But the incentive is there because these institutions, Western institutions, usually are in lacking of fund, right? So when Chinese money come in, they would just take it without thinking twice.
Well, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the other day you can sell your soul for a can of soybeans, and that's what he accused